My name is Bob Darrell. I'm an alcoholic. We spend a lot of time on resentment. The book says it's number one offender. If you've noticed something, when we did the first three columns on the resentment list process, it was almost as if I took the position of the prosecuting attorney. And then from this was our course, through referring to our list again, I've had to take the position of the defense attorney. One place, I'm looking at it from my self-centered prosecuting point of view and judgment, and then I have to look at it from an other-centered point of view and put myself in their place and see it through their eyes. And that's where the shift, the change of perception comes, the 180-degree turn. And one of the great things that happens to me as a result, not only of doing this myself in my own fourth and fifth step, but then consequently over the years through listening to other fifth steps, is that I start to get that maybe what Einstein said was true when he said the great illusion of mankind is that there's more than one of us here. You listen to enough fifth steps and you do enough inventories, and you know what you see? You see the same guy in different towns with different faces doing the same thing to different people. It's the same guy. It's never any different. I'm waiting for a different fifth step. I'm waiting. Sometimes I wish that it would be different. I wish somebody would come up with something new with, fluids and barnyard animals and jumper cables and visqueen or something. But it's never anything that exciting or dramatic. It's just the same pathetic judgments and the same pathetic insecurities and fears and the same pathetic self-justified sexual gratification endeavors and excursions. It's the same stuff over and over and over and over. We're all the same. The Hindus, we were talking about the Hinduism at lunch a little bit. The Hindus have a story of creation that is marvelous. Unlike the Judeo-Christian story of creation where God created the heaven and the earth in 7 days, etc., the Hindus have their story of creation is called Maya, which means the great illusion. And their story is that God existed unto himself with nothing else for endless in eons, for endlessness. And after eons of endlessness unto himself with nothing else, he became bored. So he created this cosmic game. And what the game was, he decided to break himself up into an infinite number of parts, give all the parts amnesia, and the game is which parts are going to realize they're not separate first. And isn't the separation the illusion of the ego? That it comes from my judgment? My judgment, the greatest judgment, the biggest wrong I've ever had is that my case is different. I'm not like you. You wouldn't understand me. But the real truth is in the realm of the spirit, and that's one of the things it's going to talk about later in the steps, that we are to enter into the realm of the spirit. In the realm of the spirit, there is no separation. There is no separation. And the Hindus call that enlightenment. When you finally got it, that there is no separation between you and me and you and God. It's all the same. It's all the same. But the illusions of the ego and the defenses that we create the separation. I'll give you a little example of this. I want to go through the process of resentment real quickly with one resentment and to show you exactly how it works. And if you have a resentment that's unresolved, the best resentments to work this with are ones that are justified. They're the best ones to work it with. Okay, I'll tell you the story, the kind of the prelude to the resentment. When I was 6 years sober, I got married to a gal I met in Alcoholics Anonymous. And we were married for 4.5 years. When we were married almost 3 years, maybe, yeah, a little less than 3 years, we had a child, my daughter, uh, Katie, who is the love of my life. We just had our 16th birthday party, and she's just a sweetheart. And we had Katie, and then about a year and a half, not quite, no, about a year after we had Katie, my wife came to me one day and told me that she wanted a divorce. And I'll tell you, one of the symptoms of my own particular self-centeredness when I'm in it is that I don't get it. I don't if I'm fine, I think the world's fine. I don't pay attention. I don't get it if there's something wrong with you unless you tell me and wave a flag in my face. I'll just ignore it wrapped up in me, right? And I didn't think there was a problem in the marriage. Matter of fact, somebody would ask me, I said, "Oh, we got the perfect day, marriage, it's wonderful." Didn't even know until she asked me for a divorce. Then I got it. Okay, maybe there's a problem here. And I said to her, I said, "Jesus, really? What's wrong?" "Well, I'm just not happy. I just don't want to even." So I talked her out of the divorce. I said, "Let's go to some marriage counseling." And she agreed. She said, "Okay, we'll try the marriage counseling." We started entering into marriage counseling. And the guy, my first sponsor, who was my sponsor back then, had retired, and he bought a bus. And he was on an extended 6-month to a year sabbatical incommunicado, could not talk to him. He was traveling around the country in this bus. And he was somewhere in Kentucky or Washington, D.C., or somewhere on the East Coast at the time in his deal he was in. And so my confidant through all of this, the guy I started talking to, was a guy that I sponsored named Craig, who was sober at the time about 3 years. And he was sort of one of my favorite pigeons that I sponsored. And him and I he was the guy that I would talk to about the marriage problems and about what was going on in counseling, etc. He was my confidant. Went to marriage counseling for a couple months. And one day, my wife comes up to me and she says, "I don't want to do the marriage counseling anymore. I'm worn out." And I said, "Okay." And I there was something wasn't happening in the marriage counseling. And no matter what would come up, she would say something. I'd say, "Okay, we can try that." And we'd try it, and nothing would be different. It was still a problem there. And it was like, I didn't know what it was. And I just thought, well, maybe it's just meant to be. And we decided to get a divorce. And in Las Vegas, an uncontested divorce can happen quickly. I mean, like 10 days. It's quick. And we got a divorce on a Thursday. The papers were finalized. Friday, the next day, my wife and daughter moved in with Craig, my best friend, my sponsee, my confidant. And I find out that they had been sleeping together for over the last year of my marriage. And I didn't know about it. And I found out that everybody in AA knew about it except me. Now, here I am. I'm in my 11th year of sobriety. And you guys have been telling me for almost 11 years that there's no such thing as a justifiable resentment. Well, I got one now. And I can even get old timers in AA to agree with me. I got that ability, maybe some of you have it, walking into a room, 50 people, and just intuitively know who to go to that'll side with you. You know what I mean? That'll agree with you, that'll co-sign your crap. And it doesn't matter how long you're sober. And I'd find those guys sober 25, 30 years. I'd tell them my tale of woe, and they'd say things to me like, "Geez, Bob, and God, didn't you just buy her a new car?" And I'd go, "Yes, I did." And the nail holes in my hands would open up from the cross a little bigger, and it was hideous. It was awful. And I'm dying. And I'll tell you, if there was a short period of time, not very long, where I got some vindication and I got some mileage out of being a victim. You do get a lot of attention after being really hurt. You get a little bit of attention and you get that ego pump of feeling smugly superior. Well, I've never cheated on her, that kind of crap. But I'll tell you, even though you get a little bit of ego gratification from that, If you're an alcoholic of my type, you start to get real sick of spirit right in here, real sick. And it's forcing me into my head, and I'm going crazy. And I can't get rid of it. And I sat down with this book, and I was going to try to do the resentment inventory, and it was too close. I couldn't do it yet. And I'd go to meetings, and I would talk about it, meetings, and people would line up to give me advice. Oh, and it was hideous. One guy said to me, well, Bob, just don't think about it. I thought, oh, God, how do you do that? I mean, how do you stop thinking about something you can't stop thinking about? One guy said to me, well, if you believed in God, it wouldn't be a problem. I thought, oh, weird. I wanted to hit him. I believe in God, but it's a problem. And God was very, very merciful to me. Thank God that I had a high level of involvement in AA, and all of a sudden, it was funny how God works. All of a sudden, I got more guys asking me to sponsor them with various lengths of sobriety that are going through divorces and relationship breakups. I mean, there waves of them are coming, and I'd fill my car up with a bunch of them, and we'd drive to the meeting, go to the meeting. We'd be the depressed section of the meeting, and you almost hear the chairman tell the secretaries tell the chairman, don't call on them, they'll talk about that stuff. And these guys relieved me of the bondage of self. They gave me islands in my day where I would get me off of me a little bit. I remember just being insane. I just came from dropping my daughter off at the house where they lived all together and watched them wave goodbye as I drove away alone. My daughter and him and her standing there, and I'm dying inside. And I'm dying. And I drove over to pick up this guy I'm sponsoring that's an idiot, and I don't want to pick him up. And he gets in the car, and he's sitting next to me in the car, and he starts crying because he can't see his kids, and he hasn't seen them in 2 years. And another birthday for his one daughter just went by. And I got out of myself a little bit, And those islands of relief from me bought me enough time to eventually go back and do this process. And I put both their names down, column number 1. Column number 2, what they did, the lies, the infidelity, the cheating, the whole deal. Column number 3, what was hurt, threatened, affected, or interfered with, everything. My pride was devastated. My ambitions, my pocketbook, my emotional and material security, my relationships in AA, my sex relations, everything was threatened. Everything was hurt. Everything was affected. Nothing was left untouched. And then it says this was our course. And it's asking me to do something that was very hard to do. I had to look at the situation through their eyes. How would they be seeing it if they were telling their sponsor about it? If they were honest with themselves about what happened, what would they be saying to themselves or to someone else? The book says this was our course. We must realize I had to get it. That though I didn't like the symptoms of their sickness and how they affected me, that they were like me. Spiritually sick. And I said that prayer. And I'll tell you what I started to get. I started to get a sense of what it must have been like to be my ex-wife in that marriage. I started to understand what it would have been like to be a gal who grew up in an alcoholic home, not as I did. I didn't grow up in an alcoholic home. An alcoholic home that by the time she entered into sobriety, she had developed certain defense mechanisms that rendered her absolutely incapable of confrontation. Absolutely incapable of being dissatisfied and telling someone about it because she was too afraid of their rejection. And she marries a guy who's Mr. AA, who goes to a lot of meetings, and he's got this opportunity in business to build this business, but he's got to all of a sudden, after they're married for a little while, he's got to work 70 hours a week to build this business. which was a once in a lifetime opportunity. But she put her whole life around a guy, and in short order, a guy that really wasn't there very much. A guy that worked 70 hours a week and then did AA commitments to keep his own sanity and was gone most of the time. And I started to get a sense, see, she didn't have the involvement in a job or a business. She didn't work. She didn't have the life that filled her up that I had. I was the life that she turned to fill up, and I ain't there. And when I started to really get it, where she was coming from, and really understand and realize inside myself the desolation and the loneliness that she must have experienced in that marriage, and her trappedness, because she didn't have the skills to get out of it. She didn't have the skills to get involved in a lot of stuff and fill her life up. She didn't have the skills to even tell me she was dissatisfied. Everything was fine all the time. And I pictured myself in that trap. And when I really got it, I thought to myself, my God, how did she last as long as she did? I would have had an affair a year before she did. And I would have felt awful about doing it. And Karen felt awful about doing it. She suffered tremendous from that action. She really did. And I started to look at the last part. Where was I selfish, dishonest, resentful, afraid, self-seeking? And you know what I saw that was really, when I went through these questions, where was I selfish? The whole thing was about me. I am so wrapped up in myself, in my little plans and designs, that I never once stopped to consider what's going on with her. I never got other-centered enough to wonder how full her life is, because mine was fine, thank you. I never got other-centered enough to ever wonder, is this plan of mine to work 70 hours a week and do all this AA and leaving you here by yourself, is that okay for you? I never even asked. I just had the blinders on of selfishness. This is my little plans and designs. And where was I dishonest? Oh, God. I lied to myself about a lot of stuff. I had a lot of justifications. I remember one of them was, even when I started to look at some of this stuff, I started saying, yeah, but I had to do all that. I mean, my God, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have this business. I mean, I've been stupid not to do it, and I had to work 70 hours a week, and that was true. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I did have to work. I've had probably 60 anyway, but I'm a little over-the-top obsessive guy, and I became a little bit of a workaholic, and that's all true. And it was also true that because of that high involvement level and at work and having a wife and kids and everything, I had to do AA or go crazy. That's all true. But there's a deeper truth. And the deeper truth is, even though there is some element of validity in those justifications, those things were also very convenient. Because my big secret is I don't know how to do intimacy. My big secret is after about 6 or 8 months in a relationship, I've told you all the funny stories about my childhood. We've done all the little conversation stuff. Now, all of a sudden, there's dead air and a living day-by-day adventure with another human being I've never had and didn't know how to do. I didn't know how to grow together with someone. I didn't know how to integrate myself in a partnership in someone else's life. And it was an awkward, when the stories were over and the shine of everything wore off, there was an emptiness in there and a feeling of inadequacy. And so it was very convenient to get busy because I didn't know what else to do. And guys like me, when the vacancy's on you, one way to get away from it is to stay busy. So I worked 70 hours a week. And I had AA commitments, and I sponsored guys, and I was on committees, and I was all that stuff. Where was I dishonest? And I made this illusion in my mind of what a great husband I was. Such a bunch of crap. I was great in the fact that I was a good provider and I never cheated on her, but in the real day-to-day things that really matter, I sucked. I was terrible. On the matters of the heart, the things that really have substance in a relationship, I was terrible. I'd never grown up. Was I terrible because I was a bad guy? No, I just never learned how to do that stuff. As if I don't know what it is about me. I won't ask for help in an area because I think I should know. I said I should know. I don't want to look like I don't know. I didn't know. Where was I self-seeking? It was all about me and trying to fill my holes, trying to keep everything juggled and in place. And where was I frightened? Oh my God, I was scared to death. I remember a night my wife was pregnant and my daughter was coming pretty soon. I remember a night when I was so overcome with anxiety and fear, I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown. I remember getting in my car and driving up into Utah, drove hundreds of miles, and I didn't ever want to come back. I was scared to death. I was a guy who never even could take care of myself. And now I had a wife and a child on the way. And I was overwhelmed. It was just too big. It was too much for me. You see, I was back in the driver's seat. God was not running my life. Somehow it got to be back in my care. If I'd have trusted God, I'd just been able to show up for the next thing. But I had it right here on me. And it was overwhelming. I was scared to death. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where was I to blame? I'll tell you something that became real clear to me. If I would, entering into that marriage, if I would have went to a major university and hired every genius, every professor that was expert in the areas of psychology and sociology, and I brought them together in a big conference room, and I gave them the psychological profiles of the gal I was going to marry and tell them everything about her and let them interview them, and then said to them, in light of all of this information, here's a gal that's faithful, good-natured, loving, kind, monogamous. Can you gentlemen come up with a game plan that I can implement over the next couple years that would make her cheat on me? Can you come up with something like that? I'm telling you, whatever they would have come up with wouldn't have been as more effective than what I did. See, I'm the guy. Sometimes people hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that sometime in the past, we've made decisions based on self, which later placed us in that position to be hurt. I'm the guy. And I was able to do the same thing for him. He was actually easier. She was the harder stretch for me. Because the minute I started to put myself in his position, it was like, oh yeah. I remember him one time saying to me, he got sober and he was a lonely guy and he didn't do very well with women and he really wanted a relationship. But he said to me one time, he said, God, if I could just someday have what you have with Karen. I didn't think he meant specifically. I thought he meant in a general way, right? But when I was able to do this was our course with him. And I mean, he had her on a pedestal of like my sponsor's wife, and she's young and beautiful and all this. And she's sober a long time, longer than him, and all this other stuff. And then knowing what it's like to be a guy, I know as a guy, and I know what happened. The details in their deal was she initiated it all out of her resentment towards me because she was lonely and pissed because I was gone. And I know as a guy, there have been times in my life where I have had the most noble, honorable intentions, very, really good of heart. And I've been with a gal and absolutely had made up my mind. This is on the square here. There's nothing going to happen here. We're just going to be friends, and this is just the way it is. And a gal can do certain things and touch me in a certain way where I will be frantically looking for that resolve. I know it was here a minute ago. Where did that go? I mean, and it's gone. And I know that about me. I know that's why I will avoid the situations where I'm liable to do something that later I'm going to think, God, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Not because I'm such a great guy. I've learned, if nothing else, in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've learned to protect Bob from Bob. And so I could see him very easily and myself and him very easily. And I came out the backside of that and I realized I owed both of them a tremendous amends. And I tell you what happened when I made the amends to her. It was 3 parts. The first part, I said something to her that I think in the bottom of her soul she wanted to hear. I told her how sorry I was for not being there for her. And more importantly, I told her that I got it. I understood what she went through. And I understood exactly how what happened. And I think she'd wanted to hear me. She wanted me to get that so bad. And there was a healing not only in me as a result of that amends, but in her. And we've become really good friends. And I did the same thing with him. And part of my amends to him and to her is that I went around Alcoholics Anonymous like an idiot for about 6 months. Every time they'd let me share at a meeting, I would tell my tale of woe, justifying sharing it at meetings that I need to get this off my chest. And no, that's a bunch of crap. You know what I was really doing? I wanted everybody in the meeting to think of them as badly as I did. I wanted everybody that would listen to me to hate them the way I hated them. And I'll tell you something, I did a lot of harm to them. And I harmed their reputation because I didn't tell the whole truth. I told my self-centered, judgmental, vindictive version of it. And part of the amends to them was to go around and tell the truth. And the truth was that they didn't do anything that I wouldn't have done if somebody had put me in the position I put them in. That they weren't bad guys. They were people that were just like me. And that I could have easily done the same thing that they did. And what a tremendous healing that occurred as a result of this part of the book. See, I came out the other side and I'm free. I sponsor him. I sponsored him now for a long time. There was about a couple-year period where I didn't. And he was lost. He almost died as a result of that. He had a hard time taking himself off the hook. And I had a tremendous amends to make to him because I bad-rapped him and I hurt his reputation. I tried to stab him in the back by slander and gossip in Alcoholics Anonymous. I wanted everybody you know what I really secretly wanted? I wanted everybody to hate him and ostracize him from AA so he would have to die of alcoholism. All right? Pretty pathetic. I had to go make amends to him. He's an outstanding member of my home group. He's one of the best guys I sponsor today. And I'll tell you what else he is. Him and Karen got married after that, and it's pretty hard to maintain a relationship when you start like that. And they eventually got divorced. And I'll tell you, a funny thing happened. I'd have never guessed. I spent 6 months working with both of them, trying to help them to save their marriage. Isn't that a bizarre thing? Not a bizarre thing. You know why I did it? I really believed in my heart they were good for each other. They were much better together than her and I ever were. And you know what else? He was an incredible stepfather to my daughter and still is. I introduce him to people as my ex-husband-in-law. And we just were at my daughter's birthday and we're just palling it up and crying and laughing and having a good time. And even the fact that they're divorced, he's still part of my daughter's life. He's a good guy. We've sat the three of us at ball games and cheered my daughter on and booed the other team, and it's a great thing. There's a tremendous power in this thing called resentment. And I'll tell you, if you're sitting here and all you've ever done is tell somebody your life story, you've missed a lot of this, really. I would highly recommend going back and following this procedure and finding someone else that can help you do it. Page 67, the second part, we're going to kind of go through fear and sex quickly. I don't like to do sex quickly, but it's just what we'll do. It says, bottom of page 67, it says, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. Every resentment I ever had involved fear, without exception. It is impossible to be angry without being threatened. You can't do it. And yet I was pathological in my life to the point where I was so afraid of being afraid. I developed certain defense mechanisms that when I was threatened, I jumped right to rage because I don't even want to admit to myself that I'm scared. I just automatically, some of the worst fights I've been in my life, some of the worst violence that I've participated in, some of the most hideous stuff I've ever done has not been because I was tough. It's because I was scared to death. And I was so afraid of being weak and letting anybody ever know that I was afraid. It cultivated this defense mechanism of rage and violence and fear. So you'd never know what a pathetic weakling, scared weakling I am. I did that in county jails. I'd put on that gorilla outfit and act like a tough guy. I did it when I ran the streets. I did it. I was afraid. And I didn't want to be afraid. And I have this fundamental basic fear of being afraid. I think somewhere as a young child, I came to the conclusion that if you're afraid, you're vulnerable, you're weak, people can run over you, they can take advantage of you, you're less than human, there's something wrong with you if you're afraid. Never show your fear. Never be afraid. And so I come into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm in my between 4 and 5 years of sobriety, and I'm starting to do my first real inventory out of the book. And I get through the resentment section, and I did pretty good with that. Didn't come too difficult. But I got to the fear section, and I'm blocked. And I don't know what's wrong with me. And I'm sitting at the kitchen table, and I got this yellow legal pad, and I got fear written across the top of it. And I'm trying to figure out something to put down on this paper, and I'm coming up blank. I'm thinking, man, I can't think of anything I'm afraid of. I don't really feel afraid of anything. And so the thought went through my mind, well, maybe, oh God, I'm sober a few years now. Maybe AA works. Maybe I just don't have any fear anymore. I went to a late night meeting, and there was a guy there sober a long time, and I grabbed him. I said, I'm doing this inventory, and I just finished my resentment section. I started the fear thing, and I don't have any fears. I said, I don't think I have any fears anymore. He looked at me. He said, really? I said, yeah, I don't think I have any fears. He said, can I ask you some questions? I said, yeah, sure. He said, are you afraid of large, angry, barking dogs? Well, yeah. He said, oh, good. You put that down. That's good. Put that down. How about rattlesnakes? Well, yeah. Black widow spiders? Yeah. Are you afraid of being embarrassed? Yeah. Are you sometimes afraid of what people think of you? Yeah. Are you afraid of growing old alone? Yeah. Are you afraid no one will ever really love you? Yeah. Are you afraid of being sick and not being able to take care of yourself? Yeah. Are you afraid that God's going to find out what a craphead you are and pull his grace away from you? Yeah. Are you afraid of success and all the responsibilities that come with it? Yeah. Are you afraid of failure? Yeah. Are you afraid of stuff from your past catching up with you? Yeah. Are there people that you're afraid to face that you haven't seen for years? Yeah. Are you afraid of homosexuality? Yeah. It's in county jails. Are you afraid of cancer? Oh, jeez. Yeah, I had cancer every other day, and when I was new, I could feel brain tumors growing in my head. Oh, I remember one time I got up in the morning and something was wrong with my leg, and I couldn't. It was screwed up, and I knew it was bone cancer. I knew it, and I went down to the hospital, and I waited in the waiting room for an hour and a half, and I'm to get X-rays and stuff, and I know it's bone cancer. And I'm in the waiting room and I'm doing my deathbed speeches. I'm imagining what's going to happen in the last stages when I'm in the cancer ward and the people from AA come in to see me and I'm giving my spiritual last talk. And it's wonderful too. It's really wonderful. And I got it all figured out. And then the people, I'm going to let them know how they weren't quite right to me and, in life, and how they're going to feel bad when they find out I was dying and they hadn't treated me right. And, all that crap. And they get the x-rays and the doctor finally sees me and he says, there's nothing wrong with your leg. I think you slept on it funny or something. And I want a second opinion. It's like, what do you, no, you're sure? I don't want to be wrong about my fears. I would rather be right and dying of cancer, but right. I like to be right than to be wrong and free and go home and live a normal life. Isn't that bizarre? I'd want to be that right about something I get convinced of. And I found that I was afraid of a lot. It says it's an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. I'm sitting at that kitchen table looking for fear, and I come up blank because I'm like a fish looking for water. It is the driving, consuming, motivating force in my life, and I've just adjusted to it. As Dr. Silkworth says to us, our alcoholic life seems the only normal one. I just have assumed that it's normal to worry about everything. I think it's normal to live with an edge of apprehension and anxiety in your life. I think it's normal to have a head that spins occasionally about stuff. I think it's normal to have 30 conversations with someone before you actually go talk to them. I think all of that's normal. I've just adjusted to being driven by fear. It's what causes me to dress the way I dress, work the way I work where I work, do the things I do with money, live where I live, drive what I drive, talk the way I talk. It's the driving, motivating force in my life, and I can't see it because I've adjusted to the journey. Fabric of my existence shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve, but did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Psychologists call that self-fulfilling prophecies. And what happens in my life over and over again, I will get a fear that I will secretly believe. And I will believe in this fear in the face of all kinds of opinions from other people. Not going to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. I believe the fear. And then because of an inert inability to manage my own life, I start to defend myself against the fear. And inevitably, I didn't have much self-esteem, really. I didn't have a lot going for me. I was working in a kind of a minimal little job, and I was going to AA, and I was being the best Bob I could be. I was trying to chip away at my amends, and I met this girl and became obsessed with her. And I was so afraid from the gate that she was going to leave me and dump me. I was so afraid that she was going to find somebody that had more going on than I did, and I'd get dumped. And what happened is that I must have believed that fear so much that fear drove me to become the possessive, controlling, smothering guy she couldn't live with. That fear drove me to be the nutcase that would drive by our apartment in the middle of the night looking for guys' cars. It drove me to be the nutcase that would watch her in meetings to see if she's talking to any guys. She said to me one time, "You're always looking at me." What do you mean I'm always looking at you? I'm protecting my investment here. She said to me one time, "You're smothering me." What do you mean? What? I don't get it. I don't get it. And what happened, and I didn't realize this until down the road further when I got in a relationship with someone who was doing that to me. And then I got it. And I had never been in that spot again in my life. I'd beat it out of me. I'd never been in that spot again. And what I had done is I had literally drove her out of my life. And I remember the day she left and she went with this other guy and they went off to his townhouse. I remember the day. There was a little voice in the back of my head that said, "See? You're right. I like being right. I like being right. Even if it means I'm broken, laying in the gutter, dying, at least I was right." You know what I mean? I make that stuff come true. I had a job one time. My dad helped me get this job. Needed a job badly. My dad knew this guy owned this company that it was an environmental engineering outfit. And this was back in the day when environmental engineering was cutting edge stuff. There was all of a sudden government mandates in place for every industry to clean up their air pollution, to test their smokestacks, to test their water coming out of the factories back east. And back east is just tons of factories. And this company was on the cutting edge. And the guy who owned the company hired me and gave me a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that if I stayed there, he would teach me how to become an environmental engineer and walk me through the process. And without ever finishing college, I could actually have gotten certified to work for his company as an environmental engineer. I would have been in the ground floor. Tremendous opportunity. But the problem is he gave it to a person with the mind of a chronic alcoholic. And I went there afraid. And I went there afraid that I didn't measure up. I went there afraid that the people there were talking about me, that they were saying things like, "Look at him. The only reason he's here is his father knows the owner. He wasn't for that. We'd never have someone like him here." Now, nobody's saying that. But I'm imagining I got that fear that they're doing that. I got that fear of not being accepted by them. I got that fear that they're going to reject me. And what happened is that fear drove on me and affected my attitude and my interaction with those people and to push me to become controlling and defensive and on the muscle with them and so serious that one day they're calling me to the office and they're saying to me, "Bob, you're a hard worker, but we're going to have to let you go. Because for some reason, Bob, you're not a team player." And I made the fear come true. I made it come true. And I could tell you, I could go on and on with examples of how I make my fears come true. Part of the exact nature of my wrongs is not only was I wrong in my judgments about other people and my resentments, my fears are really judgments about my own life that I make, and I believe. I believe them. I believe when it says in the book that we think it should be classed with stealing, it robs me of my very life. I sat with a guy that was dying of cancer one time, and he was sober about 30 some years. He was an old guy, and he probably only had about a year left to go. And he said to me something I never forgot. He said, "When you get to this point in your life and you're on the home stretch and you look back over your life, it's not the things that you did wrong that you regret. It's the things you were afraid to try. And the fear will steal you, will rob you of your very life." See, I'm the kind of guy that somebody says to me in early sobriety, "Do you want to try snow skiing? You'd really like it." No, I don't. I wouldn't like that. I never did it. How do I know? I'm afraid. I'm afraid of trying it looking dumb. Somebody said to me, "Boy, you got to try scuba diving. I think you'd really like it." I wouldn't like that. I know. See, I just know stuff, you know. I was afraid. Why don't you try bowling, golf? Why don't you try jogging? Why don't you try working out? Why don't you try motorcycles? You used to ride when before you got so screwed up on the drug. Nah, I don't like that. I wouldn't like that anymore. So I never tried nothing. I was sober. I was sober 10 years before I had a core and a trust enough in God to be able to show up in life and try some stuff like that. And really it didn't matter whether I looked like a dummy or not. And to my amazement, I loved to ski. I loved it. I was so wrong in that judgment. I believed with everything in me I wouldn't like it. No, that's not gonna be a bad experience for me. I believed that about motorcycles. I believed it about scuba diving. I believed it about some people that I just was so afraid they wouldn't like me that I never tried to get next to them. I have a guy that I sponsored just recently. He said to me, he's enthralled with this girl. And he says, God, I can't stop thinking about her. I said, is she single? Yeah. Ask her out. Oh, no. No, I'm not going to ask her. Ask her out. No. I said, why not? Ask her out. He said, she'll say no. I said, let me get this straight. If she says no, that means you're not going to go out with her, right? He said, yeah. I said, are you going out with her now? He says, no. I said, what the hell's the difference? Ask her to go out. Right? What's the difference? She can't reject you. You're too quick for her. You've already done it. You're too quick for her. And he asked her out, and now they're riding off into the sunset for a while anyway. Who knows in AA, you know? And he came to me. She said yes. What'd you think she was going to say? She was going to say what your head says? She's going to look at you and go, what? Me? Go out with a pathetic, useless piece of human flesh like you? I said, nobody thinks about you the way you do. Nobody believes the crap about you that you do. So I had him put on his mirror. I got this from my friend Keith. Keith told me, I heard this sponsor made him do it. I said, how do you put on the mirror? Luther, your head is wrong. And read that every day. You're wrong. So what do? We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper even though we had no resentment in connection with them. So I'm making a list. We ask ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was as good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. I cannot protect myself from the things I'm afraid of by managing well. As a matter of fact, a lot of times I make them come true. And even if I don't make them come true, I pay the dues that I would have paid if they'd have come true. I pay them 1,000 times in my mind over and over and over and over again. I make a mistake, I pay the price once. I never try, and I'm faced with the opportunity, and I pay the price over and over and over and over again. Buy in here. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was as good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve our fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. Do we think there is a better way? We think so, for we are now on a different basis. Step 3. The basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. The reason self-reliance fails me is that I do not have the capacity to carry my own life. It's too big. For me to take the responsibility of wresting happiness and satisfaction out of this world and defending myself against the things that seem to be threatening, it's more than I can handle. That's why it feels like when you're That's why we feel often like we're going to have a nervous breakdown. That's why alcohol, for those of us that insist upon playing God, is so convenient because it's a pressure valve. When we're just up to here with running the universe, we can go get drunk and go, it relieves the pressure. But those of us that can't drink anymore, we must find a better way. It says we trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. I had a nervous breakdown several years before I got sober, and I had it sober. I'd locked, it was the last time I ever went to my parents' house. I came off a drunk that was hideous. In one drunk, I'd reduced my life to nothing, lost everything. I was homeless. It was the last time I was allowed in their house, and I could stay there on the condition I didn't drink, and I didn't drink. And I went crazy. And I eventually had a nervous breakdown. And you know what it was like? When I stopped drinking, all of a sudden the whole world is on my shoulders. And when you're the center, there's a lot of crap to worry about. And there's an infinite amount of things to defend yourself. And the problem is I'm not God. And I don't have the capacity to do it. It's like going into the kitchen and getting the blender that's designed for 110 volts and taking it into your laundry room and plugging it in the outlet for the dryer that's 220. It will burn it out. It does not have the capacity to handle the load, and neither do I. That's why I need God. That's why when new guys say, "How you doing?" and they say it's too big, I know exactly what they're saying. It's too big. That's why if you're dry and you're running the universe and defending yourself and trying to protect yourself and make yourself happy, after a period of time, you start looking tired. It's too much. It's too big. Self-reliance failed me. And the answer, it says, is to trust God. I was at a retreat about a year and a half sober, and I've been saying the third step prayer every morning, and I tell you, I'm going crazy. I say the third step prayer, I get off my knees, and 15 minutes later, I'm anxious and uptight, and I'm worried, and I'm running the conversations in my head about what's going to happen when I get to work, and I'm full of anxiety. And I'm sitting at this retreat, sitting on the lawn talking to this old guy, and I'm telling him all this, and I said, "Man, I don't know what's wrong. This has got to change." And he says, "Well, do you believe in God?" And I said, "Oh, yeah. I really have a lot of faith in God. I'm sober longer than I've ever been. I know God did that. I didn't do that." He said, "And you pray every day, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "For people like us, you can have all the faith in the world and pray every day and still die of alcoholism. It's not enough." He said, "What we must have is something a little more deeper." He said, "We have to have trust." And I must have looked at him like I don't get it. He said, "Let me tell you the difference between faith and trust." He said, if you went to a circus and you sat in the audience and you watched a tight wire act, you'd sit there and you could watch a gentleman come out to the edge of the tight wire pushing a wheelbarrow. And you could sit in the audience and have complete and absolute faith that he could walk across that tight wire pushing that wheelbarrow. I bet you'd say to yourself, he's a professional. I bet he's done it 1,000 times. I'm absolutely convinced he can walk across that tight wire pushing that wheelbarrow. But if you had trust, you'd get up there and get in the wheelbarrow. And when he said that, I thought, oh, shit. Get in the wheelbarrow? No, I don't want to get in the wheelbarrow. I want to, I want to talk about getting in the wheelbarrow. I want to read about getting in the wheelbarrow. I want to go to meetings and discuss getting in the wheelbarrow, but I don't want to get in the wheelbarrow. I'm afraid. See, I'm afraid that I'll get in God's wheelbarrow. We'll get about halfway out that wire, and God's going to look and say, Is that Bob? Is that little son bitch did that to his mom and dad? Is that guy? Is that little guy used to play with it? But is that Bob? Right? I don't trust God. And yet my very life depends upon me trusting God. Why? If I learn nothing else from the inventory, I must learn that I can't trust me. That self-reliance has failed me. I am forced through a lack of alternatives towards God reliance. There's just nothing else to do. There's nowhere to go. I am forced to make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, and it can't be hypothetical. I'm the guy that has to get in the wheelbarrow. I was just having a conversation of about a year ago with a guy that I sponsor who's sober a long time. He's 18 now, he's 17. And he said to me, he's a mess. He said, I'm just crazy. I'm getting in beasts all the time at work. I'm supposed to be the boss. I'm in trouble all the time. I'm uptight all the time. I don't know what's going on. I said, you got to surrender. He says, I knew you were going to say that. I know. He says, but I'm 17 years in AA. I get that. He says, what I want to know is how the hell do you do that? How do you do that? I can say the words. I get it intellectually that I'm supposed to do it. How do you actually surrender? I told him what I believed to be true. I said, you must develop a vision of how a surrendered person would act and act like that. And he got it. He said, a surrendered guy is not going to get in beefs with these guys because he's going with the flow. He's just there to be of service. He's not there to control. I said, that's right. A surrendered guy is a guy who's showing up just trying to help God's kids and trying to be of service to his boss. He doesn't have to control or defend against nothing. And he started trying to act like a vision that he developed of what a surrendered person would act like. And just in the last year, they just had a big party for him. All the people that he was at odds with just had a big party for him at the job and gave through this for his birthday and just all this. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. Because self-reliance was failing him. If it would have worked, if self-reliance worked, AA would be giving workshops on how to better run your life. But AA only talks about one thing, how to let go of your life. See, because I fail at life itself. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It is my greatest virtue is my failure. My not enoughness is the greatest thing I have going for me. And often in AA meetings, people will talk bad about our inadequacies as if you're supposed to overcome them. This feeling of not enoughness, you're supposed to outgrow it. No, I'm not. It is my greatest virtue. My not enoughness and my inadequacy is what brings me to the table with God. I'll tell you something, if I was enough, screw God, screw you, screw my sponsor. I'm going to go do my life. My failure and inadequacy and inability to run my life is the greatest virtue I have. It's what brings me to the table. Or else, why would I come to this party? I wouldn't come to this party. Except I don't have a choice. My failure becomes my greatest asset. Just that we are in the world to play the role he assigns, just to the extent that we do as we think he would have us and humbly rely on him, does he enable us to match calamity with serenity. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon God or depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let him demonstrate through us what he can do. We ask him, as a prayer, we ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. And if I will do that, it says at once, I will commence to outgrow fear. Never, I don't think, to get completely removed from it, but I will outgrow it. You know what outgrowing fear means to me? Is that I keep enough courage to keep one step in front of it to keep moving forward. There was a time in my life when fear overwhelmed me. It kept me on the sofa. I couldn't get off the sofa. I outgrow fear just to the extent that it's still there. It's still a gnawing force that chases me around. It is part of my inclination to be afraid. Comes with the territory of being inclined towards self-involvement. But I stay one step ahead of it, and one step in God's direction, and not back there. Not back there. And what it talks about in this paragraph, rather than it making me fearless, it talks about getting courage. The courage to walk through the fear. The courage to show up when I'm scared and face people when I've screwed up and say, I was wrong. The courage to show up for my own life. The courage not to believe my head. When my head says, don't go over there, you're not going to like that. It's going to be bad. They don't like you. They're against you. Don't even go over there. And I'll say, thank you for sharing, and go anyway. And once again, prove my head wrong. I wonder how many times I got to prove my head wrong before my head just quits. How many thousands of times my head tells me, you're not going to like this. It's going to be awful. It's terrible. Don't do this. They don't like you. They're against you. Don't do. And I go through it. I walk through it. And it's not like that at all. When is my head going to go, all right, I'm going to leave you alone? It won't leave me alone. It always shows up, and it always has an opinion, and it always wants to tell me how this is going to be awful. I don't know about your head. My head never projects good stuff. I never wake up in the morning and it says to me, oh, Bob, they're going to love you today. Oh, Bob, they're just waiting to have you part of their life. Stay. It never says that to me. It says, you know what they're thinking about you? It says all that hideous stuff to me. And it's wrong. It's wrong. All the time. It's wrong. Thank God it's wrong. At once we commenced to outgrow fear. Now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cries that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it, or that it isn't the right kind, whatever that means. I never get that. I want pictures. I don't know what they mean. I don't know. There's two schools of thought, and everything in AA and everything in between. And the world's like that. I remember this. I don't know if you guys were around. When I was a kid, in the late 60s, early 70s, the free love thing, where people were so open with sex that huge communes of 30, 40 people would all have sex with each other all the time. And it was just sex. Everybody had sex with everything. And they thought that was great. And then I grew up in a childhood where sex was very religious, and sex was evil, and it probably came from Satan, and it was dirty and disgusting, and you only did it in the dark with someone you love, which will put a spin on your personality in relationships if you come from that place. And you have both extremes. Both extremes. And we have both extremes in AA. We have everything in Alcoholics Anonymous that's in the human race, probably in capital letters. We have the people that come in here that have spent a whole life of trying, that really had so many problems with sex that they couldn't even try it until they were drunk out of their mind, because they were so full of fear and shame and inadequacy. And then there are other people that were so much the other way, you wouldn't even want to leave them alone with your poodle. Geez. And we have everything in between. Everything on the spectrum of sexuality we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything. We're no different than any other society. And that one of the amazing things is that the way the book treats this, it's so sensible and down to earth. It says, we want to stay out of this controversy. This is an outside issue of what kind of sex is right and what kind's not. What your level of promiscuity or sexual involvement or frequency is none of our business. Who you have sex with is none of our business. It says we do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. Well, if that's true, God, what are we going to talk about at Denny's now? Jesus, guys, it's all you go to Denny's with a bunch of alcoholics. You know who's sleeping with who? I mean, it's all they do. You know, it's just crazy. I stay out of that stuff. I really try. I tell the guys I sponsor, stop that. Stop it. Stop it. You sound like an old lady. You know, gossip. Stop it. We're not the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. And that's great news for most of us, because I've never met an alcoholic yet that didn't come to Alcoholics Anonymous and no matter where they were on the spectrum of sexuality, not feel ashamed of themselves. And the people who almost had no sex because they were so afraid, and the one or two times they had sex and they had to be extremely drunk to do it, feel very ashamed of themselves for being that way, as if there's something wrong with them. Just as much as the person who had their sexual encounter list is 7 pages long because they just went from one partner to another indiscriminately, like this human instant gratification monster that just went through life. And he feels just as ashamed of his sexuality and his sexual experiences as the person who had virtually no sex at all. I don't know anybody that ever came to AA and if they really got honest about their own sexuality, really felt that it was all right. That really felt that it was just, you know, I was just the way I was supposed to be. I mean, you may say that, but most of us feel really damaged in that area. And I think the great blessing of this stance that we take of refusing to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct is I think most of us have this tremendous fear that we came here, if I was really to be transparent with you in the areas of sex and romance, that you're not going to accept me, that I am going to be too flawed, too pathetic, too deviant, too backward, too inhibited, too something. And so when we come here and we find out, hey, whatever you are, it's fine. This is not about that. The questions we are going to inventory in the sexual inventory are not about frequency or method or equipment or any of that stuff. It's not about any of that. It's about selfishness. It's about fear. It's about dishonesty. It's about inconsideration. It's about driven by self and hurting other people in the process. It's not about sex is not the problem. It's self-centered behavior that causes the problem. Sex is not the issue. Unfortunately, sometimes we use sex like a weapon and people get hurt. But it's not from the sex that they get hurt. They get hurt from the selfishness and the self-centeredness and the fear and the dishonesty. We reviewed our conduct over the years past. So once again, I'm making a list. Where had I been selfish in my sexual encounters and relationships? Where had I been dishonest? Where had I been inconsiderate? Whom had I hurt? Did I unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where was I at fault? What should I have done better? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. I tell you what I discovered. I asked myself, when I made the list of all my sexual relationships and encounters, and I started asking these questions, when I asked myself in all the questions where I had been selfish, what became very apparent is that there was selfishness in every single one of them without exception. And whether I was conscious of it or not, if I peeled away the layers of the onion, what I discovered, I was a me first person. I may dress it up and look altruistic and look loving and affection. I may let you finish first. I mean, all that stuff to hide behind the screen that it's all about me. It's all about my not wanting to be alone. It's all about my need for a partner. It's all about my need for sexual gratification, for emotional support. It's all about me. very selfish and dishonest. Oh, God. That's the problem with most. I sponsor a lot of guys, and I'll tell you, every time there's a problem in a relationship, it's not every time. A lot of times, it seems to come from dishonesty where the harm is done. And I think that we have an ability as alcoholics in relationships to be dishonest at a pathological, delusional level more than any other area of our life. And I think the reason is, is that Bill in the 12 by 12 talks about the three basic instincts that drive us: the instinct for sex, the instinct for security, both emotional and material, and the instinct for a place in society. And sexual relationships and partnerships is the only area where all three of those basic instincts can be affected or threatened in the level that they can be in those relationships. You won't get threatened in all those three areas like you will on the job unless you're sleeping with your boss, maybe. But in relationships, all three of those areas. And so the greater the potential for exposure and fear, the greater the potential for defense. And the greater for the potential for defense, the more self-will, the more dishonesty. I have lied a lot in my life, but I'm going to tell you, I never lied because I'm a liar. I lied because I was afraid. I was afraid of rejection. I was afraid of what you'd think of me. I was afraid you'd leave me. I was afraid of not being enough. That's why I lie. And because there's a greater propensity for fear in relationships, there's a greater capacity for dishonesty. One of the things that a lot of us do, that especially if you got sober, single, or maybe after you were sober for a while, you got single, and you have to go through the dating thing sober. It's hideous. It's hideous. And what happens, and what it's very common, I found myself doing this in early sobriety for a number of years, and is that in my need to be loved and accepted, I still buy the old lie. And the old lie is, if you really knew me as is, you wouldn't really love me. So what happens is I start dating someone and I create this facade, this super Bob, persona that I put out there. And all the stuff that could be questionable about Bob, I lock in a closet somewhere. Now that's Bob too, but I lock away in the closet, and we're not going to bring this Bob to the date. We're going to bring Super Bob. And Super Bob is wonderful, and he's never has a discouraging word. And he's right. And the skies are cloudy all day. That kind of, he's a great guy. The problem is when you're like that, you're writing checks you can't cash. And the problem is there always comes a day where you can't be that way anymore. And then the other guy comes out. And how many times the guys that I sponsor, they'll come up to me and they'll be insane. And they'll tell me these stories about the girl they're married to and how they've all of a sudden changed. And they haven't changed. That's the girl you married in the first place. She just never lets you see that. All right? And the problem with that is that every time I do that, I reinforce the lie that you see. And then what happens, the real me comes out, and you get disillusioned and hurt, and you feel lied to, and you can't trust me, and you reject me. The little voice in my head says, see? When they find out who you really are, nobody's going to love you. I get to be right again. And every time I lie I put the facade out, I reinforce the secret belief that as is, I'm not enough. And I'll tell you, sometime in your life, you got to get to a place where you'll be who you are. And if you're loved as is, then you're really loved. And if you don't love me as is, you're not the person I'm looking for. Because if I have to be something I'm not for your approval, I would rather be alone. I can't lose myself again like that. I can't do it. I've done that. Can't do that no more. I was married to a gal. She's a sweet girl. Um, we got divorced at the end of the year. And she wanted to be married to me so badly that she created a persona. Not because she's a bad person. She's just afraid. She's afraid that I probably wouldn't marry her if I knew the truth. When I ask her about debt, and do you have any credit card debts? You ever had a bankruptcy? Do you ever have anything? Oh, no, I don't believe in it. She'd heard me tell a guy that I sponsor one day about, don't ever carry a balance in those credit cards. That's terrible interest. Don't use it if you can't pay it off, and she heard me say that. So she said parroted the same thing back to me. No, I never have had credit card debt. I don't ever do that stuff. And boy, if that was only true. And then we get married. The bankruptcy starts showing up. The $40,000 in debt. The spending addiction. The inability. And then the massive fear. As the stuff starts coming to the surface, she has to start stealing to cover it up so she doesn't get caught in the lie. And it snowballed and snowballed and snowballed, trying to put this stuff to rest before it catches up with her. And she was chairman of a roundup, and she stole $15,000 from them, trying to cover up some stuff over here. And then it stole money from me to cover up some stuff over there because they were catching her. And it's going crazy. She can't help it. She's not a bad person. She's just a person like me that I know I could get caught up in that stuff, running on self-will and just spin out of control. In the whole process, thinking that I'm protecting myself, I'm defending myself. One of my friends, a pilot, he tells a great story about when the first time he ever soloed, and he went out in this plane. He has a pilot with him, and he's at the stick by himself, and he goes into a tailspin. And he said, in the tailspin, everything in him, he's heading for the ground. He's going to die. And the guy with him is yelling, "Let go of the stick." And he's like, I can't let go of the stick. He's pulling it back because he's got to pull that plane up. And the pulling back on the stick feeds the tailspin. And the guy finally pushes him away from the stick and knocks it out of his hand. And he yells at him, "Leave it alone." But he lets go of the stick and the plane just straightens right out and flies. Because they're designed to do that. But every instinct in him was to pull back to save his life. I know about those kind of fears. I know about that kind of self-centeredness. I know about that kind of self-destruction. I know about my own inability to manage my own life. And that's where the dishonesty comes from. It's not because I'm a dishonest guy. I'm afraid. I'm scared, and I'm frantically trying to protect me. And I don't know an alcoholic that hasn't done that or is not capable. Him was to pull back to save his life. I know about those kind of fears. I know about that kind of self-centeredness. I know about that kind of self-destruction. I know about my own inability to manage my own life. And that's where the dishonesty comes from. It's not because I'm a dishonest guy. I'm afraid. I'm scared, and I'm frantically trying to protect me. And I don't know an alcoholic that hasn't done that or is not capable of doing that. But it makes it hard to live with someone who's in the middle of that. I don't make a good Al-Anon. I just don't. Steal from me and lie to me 3-4 times. And I forgive you, good at it, forgive. And then once I get it, that this ain't going away, and this is going to be a lifetime of jumping through these hoops, I'm out of here. I'm not a good Al-Anon. I listen to the Al-Anon stories of the women who put up with that stuff for... I'm Bob Darrell. I'm an alcoholic. If you have been thorough about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill towards all men, even our enemies. for we look on them as sick people. That's an important part, that this was our course. We learn how to do that. We have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. In this book, you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. We hope you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from Him. If you have already made a decision, step 3, and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, step 4, you have made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. Which brings us to step 5. I'm not going to talk too much about step 5, except a real thumbnail sketch. It says in the big book, one of the best reasons for doing step 5 is if you don't do it, you're probably not going to stay sober. That's a good reason. It's one of 6 places in the big book that comes out point blank and says, look, if this isn't happening, you're probably not going to stay sober. So that's a good, and then it goes on to explain why, because we have a tendency to live a double life. We have this, it talks about the stage character we present in AA, and then the secret person we know we really are. And I don't think alcoholics can live in that kind of inconsistency for long. The separation eats our lunch. The fear of being found out eats our lunch. And then it says on 74 and 75, it tells you who to take your 5th step with. And it says it should be a closed-mouthed, understanding person. Very important. I think hearing a 5th step is sacred ground. And I have a sacred obligation to keep my mouth shut. And if you are the type of person who you leak information like a sieve, and you have an inability to keep your mouth shut, doesn't make you a bad person. You're welcome in AA, but you probably shouldn't hear 5th steps. Go wash ashtrays or something, but don't hear 5th steps, because it's sacred ground. Because the stuff that you start blabbing around that somebody told you in confidence in a 5th step could kill them if they have not grown through it enough to accept that as public knowledge, especially when it comes to things that people are real ashamed of. Secrets. Page 75. 5th step promises, middle of the page. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. That might be the first promise. Some of us haven't been delighted about anything in years. We can look the world in the eye. I remember being new, looking at people's shoes. I remember being new, feeling so ashamed of myself and so phony and so afraid of being found out. I had this anxiety, this feeling that if you really looked deep within my eyes, you would see the disgusting person I really believed me to be inside. It's hard for me to look people in the eye. Somewhere after step, as a result of these steps, especially 5, and getting clean with all this stuff, I could start to do that with ease. The second promise, we can be alone at perfect peace and ease. I could not do that for a long time. I couldn't be alone with my head. I remember trying it at about little over 3 months sober, I think. I was at a meeting, and I was listening to one of the clubs, listening to this woman who was obviously sober a long time and had worked the steps, and she was pretty good shape. And she was talking about alone time. And the way she talked about it made it so attractive. She said how she liked to just be alone by herself and kind of commune with herself, and how much she enjoyed just being alone with herself. No music, no TV, just alone time with herself. And the way she said it sounded so attractive. I thought, yeah, I want to do that. I went back to my apartment. I went in. Nobody's there. I'm all by myself. I didn't turn the TV on, didn't turn the stereo. I'm going to commune with me. And I'll tell you something. When it got quiet out here, it got noisy in here. And after about 30 seconds, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go turn the TV set on because I'm just going, my head just started on me. What are you going to think about? What are you going to do? What are you sitting here for? This is crazy. I don't know what you're going to do. Oh, geez, that's just nuts. That's nuts. I can be alone at perfect peace and ease today. Not only can I be, I must be. I have time every day in the morning and a little bit of time at night. When just me and God, be in here, and it's good. It's good. It's essential. It's fresh air for my spirit. Important stuff. But I couldn't do it then. It says our fears fall from us. Not too long after doing step 5, I found myself a fear falling from me that I didn't even know I had. I got in my car one night and I'm sitting in the driver's seat and I'm driving away, and I drive a little way down the street, and I realized I did not look in the back seat of my car before I got in. And I was astounded because I always did. I didn't even know that was a fear. I don't know what I'm afraid is going to be lurking back there, but I just always looked back there before I got in the car. And I'm driving down. I thought it was bizarre. I didn't even have to turn around and look. I just kept on driving. And it felt, I didn't even deal with that. It just was removed from me. I guess as I was opening the channel to God, I started to feel more protected, more closer to Him. It says the next promise is we begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. I think step 5 is really where you begin the process of lightening your spirit, awakening your spirit in step 5. It really comes to fruition in step 9 it's funny about step 9. The book and the promises will be amazed before we're halfway through our 8-step list. But I tell you, in my spirit, there's a big difference between doing all your amends and doing all but 2. There's a big difference, I'm telling you. Those 2 that you hold on to make a big difference in here. That's really, I watch guys sober 20, 30 years. They're financial disaster areas. And if they I'm working with one right now, and it all came out. It's because of some unmade financial amends that he swept under the rug. But there ain't nowhere to sweep it. Don't go nowhere. Don't go nowhere. So he sabotaged his life unconsciously for all these years. Yep. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. I remember getting that. I remember the moment. I remember a sense of it was like an elated sense of hope. And I remember thinking to myself for the first time that I wasn't cured, but I remember thinking, God, I could, if I kept doing this, I would really, really be able to stay sober the rest of my life if I kept doing this one day at a time. I could maybe really do this. I think up until that time, this was some kind of another treatment self-help deal. I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know what I mean? Because I've done that. I've gone to seminars and therapists and treatment centers that have changed my life for 6 months. You know what I mean? And then you're back, there you are again with you. But I started getting a feeling after step 5 that not that I was fixed or that the drink problem had been solved, but I started getting a lot of hope that this thing could work. This could work for me. We feel we are on a broad highway walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Returning home after doing step 5, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour. This is a very important paragraph. This is the first place in the process where the book says, okay, you've been going wham, 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 right along. Now we want you to stop for an hour. And we want you to take an inventory, essentially, of what you've done so far, the first 5 steps. And you and God are going to take a look at what you've done so far, and we're going to plug any holes that exist in the foundation, because we're going to go on with some stuff that's very important. And you're not going to be able to go on with that stuff if the holes aren't plugged. It says, returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. So I'm going to sit alone at home for an hour and look back over my 4th and 5th step. Then I say a prayer. The prayer is, it says, we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better. I tell guys, say that prayer. I had one guy years ago say to me, what if I don't feel like it? I know him better. I said, hey, it doesn't say only thank him if you feel like it. Just do it. And maybe it's a leap of faith. Maybe what you really feel is tired and washed out. But maybe we're going to trust that I have just cleaned some stuff away between me and him, and whether I feel like it at the moment or not, that I am actually closer to God. And I will thank him from the bottom of my heart for the opportunity. Taking this book down from the shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps, beginning at chapter 5. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, first 5 steps, and we say another prayer. It says we ask God, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Many, I've heard, I don't even know how many 5th steps, 100, 150, I have no idea, a lot. On many occasions, many occasions, I've sent guys home to do this. And 45 minutes later, I'll get a phone call. Bob? Yeah? I forgot something. Did you say the prayer? Yep. Popped up, didn't it? Yep. What is it? Well, I stole some money at work. Oh, really? How much? $450,000. Oh, yeah, I forgot that, did you? Uh-huh. Or gal call up, Bob, forgot to tell you about something. What's that? Didn't tell you about the sheep. Huh? Sheep. Whatever it is. There's something that often happens when I'm alone with God and I ask that prayer. I say, God, have I omitted anything? And it's not unusual that something we have not consciously omitted, but omitted just the same, will just rise to the surface. And you pick up the phone, you go back to see the guy, you do whatever's necessary to get clean with it. And then it asks some questions. It says, is our work solid so far? The stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation and tried to make mortar without sand? If we're good with the first 5 steps, and we can, in the top of page 76, it says, if we can answer to our satisfaction, we're good with first 5. We then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have omitted or objectionable? Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, it's perfectly all right. We say this prayer. If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. There's nothing I'm required to do in Alcoholics Anonymous I can't do. If I get to step 6 and I've just done my 5th step and I got some defects of character that have been driving me, lust and greed, and the real truth is I understand intellectually that I really should be free of this. But the real truth is I don't really want to give him up yet. I don't want to give up all my dishonesty, because what if I ever get in a bad financial crunch? Can I reserve the right to wiggle a little bit? To just shave the truth a little bit to get a little edge? I mean, if it's really in a bad spot, you know? Or what if I really asked God to take away my lust and he did? Then what? What if I asked him to take away my greed and he did? Would I still go to work? Would I have any ambition? And I think it's perfectly all right to be afraid. Because what are my defects of character really except defective defense mechanisms that I've used to prop myself up, give me a false sense of security, protect me, take care of me? Now, intellectually, I may understand that they don't work. But there's a big gap, an abyss between intellectually knowing you should give up something and giving it up. I was addicted to cigarettes for a lot of years, and I'll tell you something. I knew for years I should quit. I'm telling you something. There's a big difference between knowing you should quit and quitting. Big difference. I knew for years I should stop drinking. I'd go into bars and order another drink. Tell them, I really should cut this shit out. I got it. Big difference between intellectually understanding that this is objectionable and being entirely ready. Entirely ready is an inside job. Entirely ready comes from God's grace. Entirely ready it comes from the opportunity of failure and grace coming together. And I'll tell you what I believe, and my experiences with step 6 has been the story of the last 25 years of my life. It's been the story of my sobriety. It's been the story of how I've become really entirely ready to give up some things that I kind of wish still worked. Because maybe at one time they did. To give up some things that I'm secretly afraid to live without. Some defense mechanisms that propped me up and that gave me at one time an illusion of security and validation. And it's the story of how I become entirely ready. And I tell you what I've discovered sometimes I become entirely ready by asking for God's grace, and he gives it to me, and I get it, and I connect the dots, and I walk, and I give it up. And other times, I can't. Other times, the way God's grace works in my life is I got to wear it out. I got to take a defective character that no longer works, and yet I still have an illusion that it might, and I got to wear it out till it's a smoldering, stinking carcass that's dead on the floor, and then I still ain't ready to walk away. I'm going to kick it again, see if I can get it to get up and ride. Right? I did that with my drinking. The last 3 years of my drinking, that's how I got sober. That's how I came to AA. I would have never come to AA during the fun years. I'm drinking. I'm not an idiot. I didn't even come here when there was a lot of problems. I had to go all the way into the phase where I've wrung every ounce of fun out of it. It's all problems. It's all terrible. And now I still tried it for another 2 years, just hoping I could get back to that, right? And I had to take it that far. And I've had to take some of my character defects that far, right? Not because I'm a bad guy. It is my nature to be that way. And one of the great things about my life from step 3 on is it's not my business. God is the director of my life. God is who he is building with me and doing with me. And it's real easy to look at members of my home group and say, you should have got over that by now. Well, God, I wonder what they're saying about me. Right? You know what I'm saying? Because it's in God's time. And AA, one of the great differences between AA And like a lot of churches and stuff, and a lot of churches, if you're a sinner, they want you to come to their church. They invite you in. They make you real welcome, but they kind of expect you to stop sinning. I mean, it's implied in the literature. In AA, we're almost the opposite. We say sin as long as you can stand it. Matter of fact, oh, you're doing that? Oh, yeah, go ahead and do that. Oh, you're going to really help some people one day when you hit a bottom with that. I'm telling you. No, really, because it's the weird crap in my life that I crash and burn with and survive that 3 years later becomes the most useful stuff I got when I'm running into a guy that's thinking about offing himself sober because he's jacked his life off. I can say, come along with me. I want to tell you what I did at 5 years sober. I want to tell you what I did at 10 years sober. I want to tell you how I jacked my paycheck off in a casino. I want to tell you about me. I want to let you know you're not alone, and there's a way to get grace in your life even when you feel unworthy of it. And my worst things about me in sobriety have become some of my greatest assets. Really. I've often wondered why God doesn't remove all my defects of character. And I'll tell you what I've discovered. I was very dishonest for a long time with me about some of this stuff. And I would whine to people about how God's not taken away my defects of character. But I tell you the truth about some of it is that I don't really want him to. And what I do is I go to him and I ask him to remove the thing, but I don't really want him to take away the defect. I want him to take away the consequences. And every defect of character has two parts. In Bill's story, there's a part of his story where he goes through a thumbnail sketch of the 12 steps, and he talks about steps 6 and 7, and he talks about defects of character in that part of the book differently than he talks about them anywhere else in AA literature. He refers to them, and he's coming from the Oxford group place, so he calls them sins, but he's talking about steps 6 and 7, and he says he asked his creator to remove them root and branch. Two parts. See, I want God to remove the branch because it's poking me in the eye, but I want to hold on to the root, which is where I get the illusion of validation and security. And the problem is you can't be free of one without the other. It's a package. That's like trying to say to God, remove the hangovers, but let me drink. You can't have one without the other. They are connected. They are part and parcel of the same experience. Every defect of character has a price and consequences, and it also has a cookie. It has a goodie attached to it. And Chuck Chamberlain used to talk about these steps 4 through 9 as a process of uncovering, discovering, and then ultimately discarding the thing in me that's blocking me. And I have to not only uncover it, but I have to discover the truth. Fracture the illusion of validation and see what's really going on. And that's where God's grace is paramount. I think a lot of my defects of character, my experience with step 6 is very similar to the guy who goes to the psychiatrist and he's beside himself. He's a nervous wreck and he goes into the psychiatrist. He says, "Doc, help me, please. My life's a mess. I really need your help." And the psychiatrist says, "Well, sure. What's going on?" And he says, "Well, my brother-in-law lives with me and he's crazy, Doc. He's insane. He thinks he's a chicken. Every morning when the sun gets up, he's running up and down this block naked, flapping his arms and clucking. The cops are at my house all the time. The neighbors will have nothing to do with me. I am an embarrassment in the community. Please, Doc, I can't live like this anymore. Will you do something?" And the psychiatrist said, "Well, sure. Here, sign these committal papers and I'll put your brother-in-law in the state mental hospital and your problems are over." The guy says, "Oh, yeah, but Doc, I don't know if I can live without the eggs." Well, there's eggs. in every defect of character. I don't hang on to stuff that hurts me because I'm self-destructive. I hang on to it because there's a secret illusion of validation or value somewhere in it that I secretly can't imagine life without. They're my defense mechanisms that are defective, and I have to give them up. In the 1940s, the Japanese Empire was faced with a tremendous, tremendous thing. As a result of 2 nuclear weapons being dropped on 2 of their major cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were faced with ultimate and complete destruction as a nation. And they had no defense. There was nothing they could do. They had no atomic bombs. They had no defensive weapons that could stop that. There was nothing that they can do. And I don't think that a harder, more wrought surrender was ever made. And they made that surrender in face of the knowledge of what they did at Pearl Harbor and what they did to our prisoners of war and of all of our soldiers and people they'd killed, of the ships they'd ambushed and sunk. And they didn't have a choice. They were faced ultimate destruction and annihilation as some of us felt like we were dying. And they signed the formal terms of surrender, which would have been, in a sense, their step 3. But that was not enough. They were required to do an inventory of all their defenses, their planes, their ships, their tanks. They had to disband their standing Army, Air Force, Navy. And they had to make this inventory of all their defensive weapons and turn over all their defenses to their enemy, what they thought was their enemy, and render themselves defenseless in order to carry out the surrender. It was not enough to sign. If they would have signed the papers and continued to maintain the defenses in the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, the war would have never stopped. They had to give up. And as a result of that surrender and their carrying out the actions that they decided to carry out in the terms of the surrender, and they've never reneged. They never created a standing army. They never turned up their arms industry again. They've stuck to it. And within 40 years, the Japanese ended up owning more of the United States than they could have ever conquered or maintained through military means. I'm telling you, they became one of the most richest, productive, affluent nations in the world as a result of giving up, and they stopped defending themselves. And you know what happened when they stopped defending themselves? Help poured in to Japan. It just poured in. And when I stopped defending myself and protecting myself, grace pours in. But you cannot be defended and surrendered at the same time. They are mutually exclusive positions. I can't stand there with a shield and a sword saying, I surrender. It ain't going to happen. I must act like someone who has surrendered and give up my defenses. And that's really what step 6 and 7 is about. It's giving up the things that, and uncovering the reasons I hang on to them. I have always wanted to be free of the discomfort of resentment, the hollow, gnawing feeling, the thing that makes my head spin where I can't sleep because I lay my head on the pillow and I think about what I'll say to that son of a bitch and what I'll do. That I hate that. I want to be free of that. But am I willing to give up the pleasure of judgment? Wow. You can't be free of one without the other. In order to be free of the resentments, I have to give up the judgment. What if I gave up all my judgment? What would I use to make me feel, to attempt to make me feel better on a spiritually bad hair day? You know those days where you feel awful and it just kind of, Gives you a sick sense of fun to feel someone that looks worse than you and judge them and make them, feel like you're superior. What would I do to try to, in a frantic way, to make myself feel better? Except that doesn't work. That's why I'm willing to give up a lot of that stuff, because I wear it out. It doesn't really make me valid or whole or complete. It doesn't really make me more secure. I just think it does. God is either everything or he's nothing. He either is or he isn't. Page 53 says, Bob, under that light, what's your choice going to be? The 7-step prayer, it says, when ready, we say something like this. My Creator. If he is my Creator, he is all of me. He's created it. There's nothing I am that God is not. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. That's a novel idea for some of us. I came to AA secretly thinking that for me to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, if I really were to surrender, I better clean my act up first and get good. The idea that God could take unto himself all of me, flawed, that I don't have to be perfect yet. I don't even have to have gotten really a lot better. That God, I could offer myself to as flawed and as incomplete and as vacant and as pitifully judgmental at times and self-centered and fearful, and that I could do that. I'm willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. We have then completed step 7. It's a tremendous prayer. Every time I read it, I am amazed that Bill Wilson wrote it, because I know Bill Wilson was like me. Self-centered, self-concerned, self-consumed. I would have never written this prayer. I would have said part of it. I would have said the first part, my Creator, I'm now willing you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which I wouldn't have said stands in the way of my usefulness. I would have said that stands in the way of everyone realizing what a terrific guy Bob is. Or at the very least, that stand in the way of my being rich and famous and happy. Don't I get at least happy? I'd at least said happy. Wouldn't you have said happy? That stands in the way of my being happy. Don't I get happy? Right? Because the great call of the alcoholic is, helping the people. That's all great. But what about me here? It doesn't even say that. It has nothing to do with me. It stands in the way of my usefulness. My usefulness. Maybe because that's the way it is. Maybe that's why God leaves some stuff that sometimes causes me discomfort. Maybe because if he ever took everything away and rendered me white as snow, that I would be absolutely useless, really. I don't imagine I'm much different than most of us. I'll tell you what I'm like when I'm having a bad day. I mean a bad day. I need help when I'm having a bad day. When I've done something that I feel really bad about myself for, like I want to go out in the garden and eat worms. Maybe I didn't eat all day and I went to a restaurant and the waitress was really slow and I just flipped out on her and read her the riot act and stormed out of there. And now I feel awful. And I can't go back in there again. Or maybe I've, as I did in my early sobriety, gambled away my whole paycheck and I don't have any money for rent or cigarettes or gas and I can't get to work. And I already owe my roommate money from last month's rent. I can't face him and I can't face my boss because I owe him money because I gambled a week before. When I'm like that, a guy that is a saint is not going to be any use. You know what I need? I need a guy that did the same thing last year and lived through it. Because first of all, before I can ever apply any light to this, any spiritual principles, the first thing I have to do is I have to deal with the separation. Because that stuff separates me apart and puts me in a corner in a feeling like I am all alone and I'm different from all of you and I've lost my sense of community. I'm no longer part of the realm of the Spirit. I am separate and apart from. And what I need, the guy that can be the most useful to me at that moment is somebody who maybe 2 weeks before gambled his paycheck and now he's been 2 weeks without a bet. Or maybe a guy that I heard talk in a meeting last week about how he read the riot act to some waitress who didn't wait on him right and how he wanted to go back and make amends. That's the guy that I need to talk to. I don't want to talk to no saint because I'm going to feel less than. I'm not going to be able to. There was a guy in Vegas who died a few years ago. Old timer, sober, 40 some years. His name was Bill. And I loved Bill. On a good day, Bill was one of my favorite members of Alcoholics Anonymous. But Bill used to always share about how it was a happy program and he'd never had a bad day since he got sober. When I was having a bad day, I avoided Bill. I'm telling you. I'm not going to share. I remember coming into a meeting one time and I just felt awful. And I had some problems at work and problems in a relationship and I needed to talk to someone. And Bill is not the guy I'm going to talk to. I can talk to Bill about AA stuff on a good day, but I can't talk to someone that exhibits an aura and says stuff in meetings like he's never had a bad day since he got sober. I don't want to talk to him when I'm having a bad day. Now, afterwards, a day or two later, I can go talk to him after I've quieted the disturbance. But you know the guys I found? I needed to find the guys that weren't perfect. They were the most useful to me, really. And so maybe that's why that some of us never outgrow our humanness here. We never get over it. The delusion that we're going to get over our alcoholism ain't going to happen. I might keep my head in the clouds with God and be spiritually centered, but my feet should always be on the earth with you guys. My feet should always be right in the trenches of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the prisons, in the Skid Row detoxes, in the halfway houses, where I can be most useful. That everything that has ever been wrong with me in my life and every mistake I've ever made will come to bear and a weapon against the disease of alcoholism for these people who suffer from alcoholism. For the first time in my life, the worst things about me, the things I hated and despised the most, become useful. Become useful. Amazing stuff what happens in God's hands. How things turn around like that. I would have never imagined that some of these things could be useful. That brings us to step 9. I'm going to go real quick through this. I think step 9, I could talk a whole day on step 9. It's probably one of the most important steps in Alcoholics Anonymous. Most of the people, my experience with, I get a lot of guys that come to me with 15 and 20 years of sobriety that have destroyed their life sober and ask me to work with them. And usually they have left out big chunks of step 9. And they left them out not because they're bad guys. They left them out because they thought they could. And nobody was breathing down their neck to pay back some of that stuff. Some of that stuff nobody even knew they owed except they knew, and they couldn't. You can't really get away from the truth within you. You may sweep it under the rug, but 5 years later it surfaces. Step 9 was the step that terrified me the most. When I was new, I remember looking at it and just being overwhelmed. I thought, oh my God, I can't do that. I can't do that. If I would have known I had to pay that back someday, I would have never stolen all that shit. I can't. It's too much. It's too big. It's too... I thought, I looked around AA, and I thought the people in AA can make amends. You're good people. I can tell by looking at you. You're nice people, kind people. You're kind to me. I bet you're always been that way. You're good people, go make amends. Good for you. You probably embarrassed your family, go say you're sorry. You probably padded your expense account at work, go make it right. Good for you. But I lived like an animal on the streets. Guys went to prison as a result of my actions because I dimed him out in order to save my own life so I wouldn't go to prison. How do you make amends to guys like that? Career criminals and outlaw motorcycle gang guys that went to prison because of you. How do you make amends for that? How do you make amends to parents that all they ever did was love you and you just battered them and broke their heart over and over and over and over again until you've destroyed them? Till your mother is on tranquilizers and in therapy and your father sleeps 15, 16 hours a day? How do you make amends to a sister who's ruined her life because her older brother is always in the newspaper and the kids at school make fun of her because he's a gangster? I wasn't really a gangster, even though I fancied myself. The police told me the truth. They said, "You're not a gangster, you're a public nuisance." How do you make amends to a guy that was your best friend, that you took a hunting knife and you opened his chest up and he lived, but he'd never be the same? How do you make amends to the friend of yours that you don't know where he is, that you ripped his brother off and let him take the blame, and it just split their family right in half, and they never would speak to each other again? How do you make amends to the nameless, faceless people that you robbed, the purses you stole, and the cars you broke into, and the houses you burglarized, and the nameless people that you ripped off in drug deals and you held guns on? How do you make amends to them? I don't even know their names. And my experience with step 8 and 9 was very similar to the experience of a kid in 3rd or 4th grade if he were to sit down one day and look at the tests that he must pass in order to graduate from high school. A kid in the 3rd or 4th grade looking at those tests would become overwhelmed. He'd look at those tests and if he was like me, he would feel I might as well quit school. I'll never, ever be able to pass those tests. I'll never be able to answer those questions. I will never even be able to understand those questions. But a funny thing happens if he shows up one day at a time and does the next indicating thing, goes to the next class, the next homework assignment, reads the next chapter. By the time he gets to the end of the 12th grade, he has everything in place within him to take those tests. And AA is kind of like that. Carl Jung was one of the first I ever heard talk of or read about that talked about a principle that is the fabric of AA. The principle of synchronicity. It's a description of God's grace, and how it works and how it seems to work in my life, and a lot of us, is that I need to change. I need to do some things that can't be done. I need to go from point A to point B, but between the 2 points is an abyss I cannot surmount. And I need to do it. And I make the commitment and the willingness to make the change, even though it is absolutely impossible for me to go from point A to point B. And from the moment of commitment, the universe gets in motion to start providing a vehicle to go from A to B that did not exist prior to my willingness to make the jump. And I have seen that happen in this principle of synchronicity, and how God's grace works in my life and my amends over the years is things of, I had to break my 8-step list into 4 parts. And I tell the guys that I sponsor to do the same thing, because there's really 4 types of amends on your 8-step list when you think about it. Because there's 2 factors that are involved. It says in there, if we haven't the willing to do this when we're facing people the idea of making amends, it says we ask for the willingness to make the amends, and we ask until it comes. In step 8, step 8 says we made a list of all persons we'd harmed, And in the book, it says we made it when we took our inventory. So it comes right off our 4-step list. All my resentments, the people I've judged harshly and hated and retaliated against, are all my 8-step list. All my fear of creditors, of all the people I'm afraid of facing and showing up in my life and ever running into, all go on my 8-step list. All my sexual encounters where I've been selfish and people got hurt, those people all go on my 8-step list. It's my job to make the list and ask for the willingness. It's God's job to provide the willingness and the opportunity, because it says made direct amends wherever possible. It's God's job to create the wherever. There's nothing I have to do in AA I can't do. So I pray for the willingness. God needs to provide the willingness and the opportunity. And I've had people in my life that I had no idea how to find them. I had one gal, I searched for her. 17 years sobriety, she just popped up out of nowhere in my life. And I found out later why she popped up. I could not find her at 4 years. I searched for her. Flew back east looking for her. Searched the town, talked to people, tried to find her, could not find her. 17 years sober, she pops up in my life. Wasn't even looking for her. Because a guy that was an old friend of mine, who I was probably the worst drunk he ever saw, just got out of Chit Chat Farms Treatment Center for his second or third time, and she was a friend of his. And I got to make the amends to her so she could put me and him together so he could come to AA and get sober. Right? I didn't see that was happening. God creates the wherever. So I got 4 columns in step 8. Column number 1. People I know where they are. I got the wherever. And I'm willing to make the amends. Easy column. Just go do it. Just go do it. Column number 2. People I know where they are. But the truth is, I ain't ready to face them yet, honestly. So I got the wherever, but I don't have the willingness. So I do what it says in the book. I ask for the willingness. I ask until it comes. Column number 3, I got the willingness. I would really like to make amends to these people, but I don't know where they are. I don't know how to find them. So they go on that list, and God must provide the wherever. And when they pop up in my life, He's already given me the willingness, I'd make the amends. And then the column number 4, I don't know where they are, and if I did screw them, I ain't going to go face them. God's got to provide me both the willingness and the wherever. And in those, every amends I've ever had to make will fall into one of those 4 categories. And I need from God one of those 2 things, either the willingness or the opportunity. I need one or the other. And it's my job to pray for the willingness, and it's God's job to provide the willingness and provide the opportunity. And He will do it in a synchronous manner, in divine order. And He always does it in a win-win situation. Always. I've had some tough amends to make in my life. I'll tell you real briefly about the hardest one of the hardest ones I ever had to make. I think one of the reasons it was so hard, it was for stuff I did sober. When I was about a little less than a year sober, probably a year, close to a year sober, I went to work as a cashier in a store for minimum wage. And I was working in this store, and I was struggling, and I'm trying to start making amends to some things that were I had to start paying back, and I had some stuff to the courts I was still trying to take care of, and some other stuff. And I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And I had a tremendous cigarette habit back in those days. I was smoking 3 packs a day. And I remember one Thursday afternoon I was at work and I ran out of cigarettes and I didn't have any money because tomorrow was payday. And one of the things that we sold at that store was cigarettes. So I thought to myself, as I usually do, I thought to myself, I'll take a pack of cigarettes, and then tomorrow when I get my paycheck, I'll cash my paycheck and I'll ring it up. It made perfect sense, logical, good thing, was okay. Nothing seemed too out of line with that. Seemed reasonable. Took the pack of cigarettes, Tomorrow came, I remember getting my paycheck, and I'm cashing the paycheck, and the fleeting thought went through my mind, I should ring up those cigarettes. But I come to work early, and I stay late sometimes, and I work harder than anybody here. And I bet you everybody does this kind of thing. I bet you it's factored into the cost of operation. I look at all the extra stuff I did, so I swept it under the rug. And within no time at all, I'm supporting my cigarette habit 100% by just taking them. And I don't even get it. And within no time at all, not only am I supporting a 3-pack a day habit, which is better than 2 cartons a week, but I'm stealing a 6-pack of Diet Coke on my weekend to take home with me. And I'm not thinking nothing of it. And all the justification is in place, the rationalization. But I'll tell you something about me in the realm of the spirit. If I'm trying to recover and heal my spirit, there's a funny thing that happens. I will take actions over here, and I don't get sick over here. Sometimes I get sick over here and over here, and I don't connect the dots. And what started happening to me is I started going to AA meetings and judging myself right out of AA. You know what it seemed like all of a sudden? It seemed like everybody in AA was dishonest and phony. It seemed like there was a lot of hypocrites in AA that weren't walking like they talk. It seemed like all of a sudden that there was some... I remember this. I was dating this girl at the time, and I started really picking her apart and finding fault with her. And the boss that I worked for, who really was a great boss, he'd never mistreated me, always treated me right. I started picking him apart in my mind and putting him down. And I'm getting lonelier and sicker, and I'm getting weird. And one night I get down on my knees, as I've been trained to do in Alcoholics Anonymous, to thank God for that day of sobriety. And on my knees, I blurted out, I said, God, what the hell's going on here? And the minute I said that, I knew what it was. In that intuitive place inside you where sometimes you get to just know stuff, I knew that the reason I'm so screwed up is that I've been stealing from my boss every single day for 7 or 8 months. Every single day. And acting like I'm such an upstanding member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And out of that came the knowledge of what I had to do, and I tell you, it terrified me. I knew I had to go to my boss and tell him I've been stealing from him. And the downside, there's 3 things wrong with that. First of all, I have watched him catch people stealing and throw them out. He's a great guy, but he has 0 tolerance for thieves in the retail business, and you can't blame him, really. Secondly, I don't have the money to pay him back. I started doing the calculations, and it was hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and I don't have it. It wouldn't have been so bad if I had the money. I could have made the big, ego-gratifying, grandiose gesture of gone in, given him the lump sum, and patting myself on the back and fire me if you want, but look what a good guy I am. I stood up and made it right. But I don't even have the money. I'm going to have to humiliate myself, go to him, admit to what I've done, and get fired, and then go get another job and make payments for probably a year to this guy. And you know what the worst thing of all was? Is that this guy that I got to go face has heard me prattle on at great length on various occasions about my rigorous program of honesty in Alcoholics Anonymous. Oh, man, I'm telling you, I don't want to do this. But I believed in my heart that if I didn't do it, that I'm probably going to drink again. I was really in a bad spot. And I went to him, and I broke down. I never felt so humiliated and so phony and so like a hypocrite and I felt like a facade human being. And I told him what I did, and he got pissed at me. But he didn't fire me. And I told him, I said, I will pay you back every single week. I will pay you back. And I'll tell you something. I did. Not only did I pay him back everything, I added on interest and another $50 because I know how I am. I'm a minimizer. It's too easy for me to minimize it and cut myself an edge. So I made sure I paid him back every plus. And I'll tell you some funny things that happened. I didn't put this together for some time later. Within 30 days, within a month of making the last payment to him and getting free, out of nowhere, a guy came to me and offered me a job for almost twice as much money with a potential for management in another retail store. And I went to him and I told him about it, gave him the 2 weeks notice. He was fine with that. He said, it's a good opportunity. I can't give you an opportunity like that here. And I went to work for one of his competitors, and I went and I ended up managing that place, and I did very well for those people. And I never stole, I never took a pencil. I never took a dime from them. I gave them 110%. A couple years later, year and a half later maybe, I'm at a Denny's one night, and I run into the guy that I'd stolen from and made the amends to. I said, how you doing? He said, doing fine. I said, what's going on? He said, I tried to sell my store. He says, I really want to retire and burn out. And I got it back in my lap. The guy who tried to buy it he was a Korean guy, and he couldn't get a license. They went to investigate him for the liquor license and the gaming license. He couldn't get it. It was too expensive to send the investigators back to Korea, and he just didn't want it. He wouldn't pay for it, and it fell through, and I ended up back running the store again. He says, I'm really burnt out. He said, but I'm sure another buyer will come along. And I'll tell you, I don't know why I said this to him. To this day, I marvel at the fact that I said it. But I found myself saying to him, God, I'd sure like to buy your store. But I don't. Be a nice thought, but I don't have any money. He looked at me and he got a funny look on his face. He says, when's your day off? I told him, I said, why don't you meet me for lunch down here at Denny's on your day off? Meet me here at noon. I said, okay. Which year at noon. I went down there at noon on my day off, had all these papers lined out. And he showed me these figures of what the store was doing, and he made me a proposition. He says, if you'll come back and run my business for me, and you can get the figures up to this level, because the business is not doing very good, but if you can get them up to this level, you will realize out of that an additional profit, which will go to you towards buying into the business. And if you can keep it up above this level, for 5 years, at the end of that 5 years, you'll be able to buy me out. We'll be 50-50 partners. You'll have earned 50% of the store, and then you can buy me out, and I can walk away from here. And I thought, oh, my God, I got nothing to lose with this deal. And I went in there. That business was grossing about $600,000 a year. And I started practicing the principles that you taught me of how be of service and forget myself, and I'm not there for me, I'm there for you, and doing all that other-centered stuff. And within 5 years, I had that business pumped up to a degree where it was making more money than anybody ever imagined. I ended up paying him, when I came time for me to buy him out of the half I didn't earn, he got twice as much as he would have gotten for the whole thing when I started there. That's how much I increased the value of the business. And I started opening other stores, one right after another, until at one point we were doing almost $10 million a year. And in early sobriety, I was on my knees in a cheap little apartment. And I had stolen from a guy, and I stood at a turning point. Maybe I could have not drank and not made that amends. Maybe. I don't know. I've seen people not make amends and stay sober for a long time. Miserable. But I'll tell you something I know for sure. I would have never ended up with that business if I hadn't made that amends. And I made that amends in a lot of fear. And I made that amends secretly believing that I was going to be hurt from it. And I'll tell you what my experience has been. I've never been hurt or diminished from anything I've ever had to pay back. As a matter of fact, everything I ever had to pay back in amends has come back to me many, many times over. Every amends I've ever made has not diminished me. It has enhanced me. But I'll tell you, on the other side of it, before you make it, it looks very threatening, and it looks like, how am I going to live if I give them that money? How am I going to do it? And the people in AA that believe the fears in their head more than they trust in God and will not walk through the fear and ask for the willingness and make the amends, they seem to stay on the verge of financial ruin and distress for years here. And what I've discovered in financial difficulties in sobriety are not financial difficulties. They're usually a problem of unmade amends. I think that there's a spiritual principle that I cannot accept and hold to myself and own and claim anything that I secretly don't deserve. And if I ain't even, I can sweep it under the rug, but I can't fool the God within me. It's not that God wouldn't give me everything. He would. I'm his favorite kid. So are you. It's just I will throw it away and piss away anything I secretly don't think I deserve. I can't hold on to it. And the great thing about step 8 and 9 is that I craft myself by getting even to reverse my karma to become a worthy receiver, so that when God gives me a good life, I don't have to sabotage my life. Step 9 and step 10 and 11 are basically step 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, all condensed in a daily process, along with the prayer and meditation. Because if I'm thorough about this process, I've opened a channel to an inspiration and intuitive thought. I've opened and unblocked a door to the God within me. And in step 11, it talks about if we keep the channel clear, that we will eventually start to rely on this intuition. What used to be an occasional hunch or inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. But it also warns in there that if I presume to be inspired at all times, I will pay for that presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. This month I'm 25 years sober, and I want to tell you that I am more sponsorable today and need sponsorship and direction in my life today, I think, more than I did when I was 3 or 4 years sober. And I'll tell you why. Because I got more to lose. And the more longevity I have in sobriety does not make my life more manageable by me. If anything, in my experience, it gives my alcoholic mind more information and ammunition to use to deceive me and delude me and to get me in trouble. And that's why I have a sponsor. And I'll say one little thing about sponsorship, and then we're going to quit. The reason that God and I can't stand alone is that I do something in my head that is insidious, and it is my nature. Instead of constantly adjusting my will and view of life to fit God's, I gradually start imagining his will is adjusting to mine. And what happens is a great example is the story of Jim Jones. Jim Jones, I believe, was an alcoholic. Jim Jones had a problem with drugs and alcohol as a child and a teenager. He got in a lot of trouble, juvenile delinquency, and then he got saved. He had a born-again experience, and out of that born-again experience, he got a calling, and the calling was to go to school in the ministry and become a minister. And he did. He went to divinity school, he became a minister, and for a number of years, I believe Jim Jones was connected, was an instrument of God. And Jim Jones went into the inner city, and he helped a lot of people down there, a lot of good stuff he did. But Jim Jones had the mind of a chronic alcoholic. And Jim Jones's view of God's will for him was never checked against anything except his own alcoholic mind. And slowly, incrementally, the self-centered fear and self-will just infiltrated his consciousness so gradually and subtly that he gradually moved and got sicker and sicker, and he never knew that he was moving in that direction. If Jim Jones would have had a sponsor at the very least, I'm sure his sponsor would have said, Jim, the Kool-Aid is a bad idea. But Jim drank that Kool-Aid and killed himself and had all those people in Jonestown commit suicide. And the tragic thing is he did it believing he was doing God's will. And I think that I could get that crazy. I think without a sponsorship, without a good sponsor and accountability to the guys I sponsor, and that is so, I tell you, there's nothing, I can't imagine my life without the people I sponsor, because sponsorship, doing 12-step work and sponsoring guys integrates itself through the whole 12-step process. How does a guy like me become entirely ready to give up some stuff that he still thinks kind of works? Except one day you realize that all these guys you sponsor, that you are the first example of Alcoholics Anonymous they ever see. And when I start to get that, I start to realize there's some things in me I don't like. I don't want to be a bad example to them. If it was just me, I might have went with the illusion of gratification and held on to some of that stuff for a while. But you see, one of the things that I've awakened to as a result of these steps is that my actions, in essence, are my vote for how I think you should do your life and how you should do AA. To some of us that have been sober a while, much is given and much is expected. I have guys that look to me as their primary example of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll tell you something. If it was just me, I wouldn't give a shit. But I love them. And I don't want to be a bad example to them. And that has given me a willingness and it forced me in some areas of my life to become entirely ready in some things that I don't think I would have done on my own. See, it's the newcomers in the 12-step work is really God's catalyst to do what I ask him to do in step 3. I said, relieve me of the bondage of self. And you know what he does? He sends me on 12-step calls. He puts guys in my life that ask me to sponsor him, that tell me their 4th and 5th steps, that ask for help with their amends. And through my attention being focused on them, I become other-centered at times in my life, and I'm relieved of the bondage of self. I've been very fortunate that I am the type of alcoholic that I can't live without this whole package. And I know that because I've tried. And the pain, you know why I think guys like me become fundamentalists and want to do it all and don't want anything. We don't want any of the therapy anymore. We don't want any of this crap. We want to do AA, is because we've tried all of that other crap and it hurts too much. Here, this works. This works. I want to thank you guys for sitting through. It's been a long day. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to come up here. If my experience has been useful at all, I want to thank you for the opportunity. You want to join me in closing in the Lord's Prayer?